The bank took Walter Hobbs's farm on a Tuesday morning, while his widow stood on the porch, holding a flag that had covered his coffin. I watched from across the street. I watched two men in dark suits nail a notice to her door, and I did nothing. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and I did nothing at all. That was October of 1954. A town called Marlow in eastern Oklahoma. Flat country, dust country. The kind of place where the wind never stops. I had come there to scout locations for a picture that was never made. The studio had sent me alone because the director was in Europe and someone needed to photograph the landscape. So there I was, standing outside a hardware store on a Tuesday morning, watching a woman lose everything her husband had spent 30 years building. Her name was Ruth Hobbs. I learned that later. At the time, she was just a figure in a gray dress, small, straight-backed, holding that folded flag against her chest like it might keep her standing, like it might be the only thing holding her upright. The men from the bank wore dark suits. One of them spoke to her while the other hammered the notice into her doorframe. I could not hear what he was saying. She did not respond. She simply stood there, looking past him, looking at something none of us could see. I should have walked away. I had no business in that woman's tragedy. I was a stranger passing through, a man with a rented car and a schedule that had nothing to do with foreclosures or widows or folded flags. But I did not walk away. I crossed the street. I do not remember deciding to do it. My feet simply moved, and then I was standing at the edge of her property, close enough to hear the banker explaining that the grace period had expired, that the payments were 4 months overdue, that the law was the law and there was nothing personal about any of it, just business. Ruth Hobbs looked at him. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were dry. That is what I remember most. No tears, no trembling, just a stillness that seemed to come from somewhere very deep, the stillness of someone who has already lost the thing that mattered most and knows that everything else is just arithmetic. The banker turned. He saw me standing there at the edge of her yard. His face shifted. I watched him recognize me. I watched the calculation behind his eyes, the sudden awareness that this foreclosure now had a witness whose name and face people might remember. He smiled, the kind of smile that has nothing to do with warmth. "Mr. Peck," he said, "this is a surprise. Are you making a picture here?" "No," I said. "I'm just watching." He did not like that. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. But he kept the smile in place. "This is a private matter," he said. "Bank business. Nothing that would interest you. It's a public street," I said. "And she's standing on her own porch. For now." He looked at Ruth, then back at me. Then he folded the papers he was holding and put them in his coat pocket. His colleague had finished with the notice. It hung there on her door, white paper against faded blue paint. "The notice has been served," he said. "She has 30 days to vacate the premises." He walked past me without another word. His colleague followed. Neither of them looked back. I listened to their footsteps. An engine start, tires on gravel, then nothing. I stood there. Ruth Hobbs stood there. The October wind moved through the bare trees along her fence line. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. "You're the actor," she said finally. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded slowly, taking her time. "My Walter liked your pictures. He watched all of them that came to the theater in town, especially the one about the lawyer, the one set in Alabama. That's kind of him to say. He's dead now. 6 weeks this coming Sunday. I'm sorry." She looked at the flag in her hands, looked at it for a long moment before she spoke again. "They sent this with him, all the way from Korea. They sent this, and a letter, and a medal I can't sell because nobody wants to buy a dead man's medal. Nobody wants that hanging on their wall." I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. Sometimes, silence is the only honest response. "He was in the First War too," she said. "Both of them. The one in Europe when he was 19, then Korea when he was 52. Can you imagine that? Surviving one war just to die in another. 33 years between them, and both times he went because they asked him to." "No, ma'am, I cannot imagine that." She turned and looked at her house. A small farmhouse. White paint peeling in long strips. A porch that sagged on the north end where the supports had started to rot. Green shutters that needed replacing. Nothing grand. Nothing that would make anyone stop and take notice. Just a place where two people had lived and worked and grown old together. Just a home. 30 years we've been here, she said. We built this place with our own hands. Walter dug the well himself. Took him 3 weeks. I planted every tree you see along that fence. I looked at the trees. Pecans and oaks. Some of them substantial enough now to shade the whole front yard. 30 years of patient roots going down into Oklahoma soil. The bank wants it for the land, she said. There's oil talk. A company from Texas has been buying up parcels all through the county. They don't care about the house. They don't care about the trees. They just want what's underneath. How much do you owe them? She told me the number. It was not a large sum. Not by the standards I had come to know in California. It was the kind of money that disappeared in Hollywood without anyone noticing. The cost of a single day's delay on a picture. I had the money, she said. Or I thought I did. Walter's pension was supposed to come through in August. The Army keeps saying it's processing. 6 weeks of letters and telephone calls while they take my home. I thought about the banker's smile. The way his voice had changed when he recognized my face. The way he had folded those papers and put them in his pocket like they were something shameful. Mrs. Hobbs, I said, would you allow me to make a telephone call from your house? She looked at me. That same steady gaze. No hope in it. No despair either. Just waiting. Just watching to see what kind of man I was. I don't take charity, she said. Not from strangers. Not from anyone. I'm not offering charity. I'm asking if I can make a telephone call. She considered this for a moment. The wind moved through the pecan trees. Then she stepped aside and gestured toward her door. The inside of the house was immaculate. Spare. Everything in its proper place. A photograph of a young man in uniform hung above the fireplace. The same man, older, in another photograph beside it. Walter Hobbs at 18. Walter Hobbs at 50. The years between them visible in every line of his face. The telephone was in the hallway. Black. Heavy. The kind that connected you to an operator who knew everyone in town. I did not call the bank. I did not call a lawyer. I called a newspaper. There was a reporter in Oklahoma City. A man named Dawson. I had met him once at a benefit dinner for veterans 2 years earlier. He covered military affairs, pensions, benefits, the endless bureaucracy that men faced when they came home. I remembered him because he had asked me questions that mattered. Not about pictures or actresses or Hollywood gossip. Questions about the men who came home and the men who did not. Questions about what we owed them. Questions most people preferred not to ask. I told him about Ruth Hobbs. I told him about the pension that had not arrived. I told him about the bank and the foreclosure and the flag she held on her porch while they nailed a notice to her door. He listened without interrupting. He asked questions. He wrote things down. I'll look into it, he said finally. But Mr. Peck, you understand what you're doing here. If I write this story, your name will be in it. Your presence will be part of the narrative. I understand that. The bank won't appreciate it. They have lawyers. They have connections. The studio might not appreciate it either. You're supposed to be scouting locations, not involving yourself in local controversies. I understand. There was a lengthy pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, thinking it through. Then he laughed, a short, tired laugh. The laugh of a man who has seen too much and stopped being surprised by any of it a long time ago. All right then, he said. I'll make some calls. I'll see what I can find out about that pension. I hung up the telephone. Ruth Hobbs was standing in the doorway to her kitchen. She had heard everything I said, every single word. Why? She asked. Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't know Walter. You're just passing through. I thought about the question. I thought about all the reasons I could give her. The righteous ones. The noble ones. The ones that would make a good speech in a picture. The words that writers put in the mouths of men like the ones I played. But standing in that hallway, Looking at that woman and the photograph of her husband on the wall behind her, I could not find any of them. They all seemed false. They all seemed too easy. Because I was there, I said finally, and I saw it, and I couldn't walk away. She nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense, as if it were the only answer that mattered, as if anything else would have been a lie. The story ran 3 days later. The headline mentioned my name. It mentioned Walter Hobbs and his 2 wars. It mentioned the pension that was 6 weeks late and the bank that would not wait 6 weeks more. Things happened after that. Things I had no control over. The pension came through by the end of the month. The bank extended its deadline and then extended it again. Letters arrived from people I had never met. Some of them angry about outside interference. Some of them grateful that someone had noticed. Most of them just curious about what a movie actor was doing in eastern Oklahoma in the first place. I left Marlow the day after my telephone call. I took my photographs and caught my train and went back to California. I never returned to that town. The picture was never made. The landscapes I photographed sat in a filing cabinet somewhere until someone threw them away. But I kept one thing. A letter arrived at my home 3 months later. No return address. Just my name on the envelope written in careful slanted handwriting. Blue ink on white paper. Inside was a single photograph. Ruth Hobbs standing on her porch. The same porch. The same house. But the notice was gone from the door. The paint looked fresh. And she was smiling. Not a large smile. Not a triumphant one. Just the quiet smile of someone who is still standing where she belongs. On the back of the photograph, in that same careful hand, she had written 2 words. Still here. I kept that photograph for years. I looked at it sometimes when the work felt hollow, when the ceremonies and the awards felt false and empty, when I needed to remember why any of it mattered at all. Because it is easy to play a man who stands up for what is right. It is easy to memorize the words and hit the marks and let the music tell the audience when to feel moved. It is easy to wear the costume and speak the lines and walk away when the director calls cut. But that woman in Oklahoma taught me something else, something harder. She taught me that the real thing is quieter than any picture. The real thing happens on ordinary streets in ordinary towns when no one is watching, when there is no music, when there are no cameras, when the only audience is your own conscience asking what kind of man you want to be. I do not know if what I did was heroism. I do not know if my telephone call made the difference, or if it was the reporter's journalism, or simply the weight of attention falling on people who preferred to operate in shadows. I only know that I was there, and I saw it. And for once in my life, I did not walk away. That is not heroism. That is just presence. That is just allowing yourself to see what is in front of you and responding to it honestly, without calculation, without wondering what it might cost. Walter Hobbs did that twice in his life. He saw his country at war, and he went. He did not calculate. He did not weigh the odds. He simply showed up. At 19 and again at 52, he showed up. His widow did the same thing that October morning. She stood on her porch, and she did not break. She held her ground because it was the only ground she had left, because it was the ground her husband had dug and planted and built with his own 2 hands. I made pictures about justice. I spoke words written by better writers than me. I wore costumes and pretended to be brave. But Ruth Hobbs was the real thing. Still here. That is enough. That has to be enough.